Chapter 12. The Hideout. Scout seemed to have found a trail of some kind. He was walking with his nose to the ground and would sometimes change direction suddenly. They weren't following a path, but gradually the woods became less dense. After a while they were walking through an evergreen forest, which eventually gave way to thick underbrush again. By this time Tom was sure that he hadn't come this way before, but he continued following his dog. Scout, at least, seemed to have something in mind, which was more than he had. Suddenly, Scout ducked between a row of bushes. When Tom followed him, he found himself on a path that looked just like the one on which he had met the poacher. His heart raced in excitement. Had Scout brought him back along the poacher's trail? If this was the same path, then they had to be close to the hideout. They followed the dark, winding trail until abruptly the dog stopped. Sniffing around, Scout left the path and squeezed through a thicket of hawthorn bushes to Tom's left. Tom wanted to follow him, but the dense branches and the sharp thorns held him back. Had he been wearing jeans and a jacket, he might have been able to force his way through, but dressed as he was, he'd be torn to shreds by the thorns. Scout whined softly, insistently, from the other side of the bushes. Tom knew his dog well and knew what that sound meant. Scout had found something important and wanted to show it to his master. A few meters down the path, the thorn bushes thinned out, and Tom decided to work his way around them. But when he turned left, farther along the path, he still found his way to Scout, blocked by the prickly bushes. As he moved on looking for a way to reach Scout, he made a remarkable discovery. Scout was in the middle of a large, almost impenetrable ring of thorn bushes. No wonder they surrounded a clearing. No doubt they surrounded a clearing. But what else was in the clearing? Tom's curiosity had been aroused. He had to find out what was hidden behind the hawthorn hedge, so he began searching for a way to get inside. After a short search, he discovered an opening blocked by branches that had been woven together. He spotted it because the leaves on the branches had wilted. The camouflage was easy to remove, and without a second thought, Tom crawled through the opening. On the other side, Scout greeted him excitedly. When Tom stood up, he saw that he was standing in a small clearing, in the middle of which stood an old shack. Tom tried the latch, but the door was locked. He tried to force it, but it didn't budge. Walking to the small window in the side, he shielded his eyes with his hands and peered inside. But it was dark in the shack, so Tom couldn't see very much. Obviously, no one was inside the hideout. Tom carefully examined the window. It was divided into 9 small panes by a wooden frame. On one side, he could see 2 hinges, so the window could be opened from the inside. After searching a little on the other side, he found the latch that held it shut. One of the bottom panes was broken, but most of the glass was still in the frame. Carefully, Tom removed the jagged pieces and put his hand through the window. By stretching as far as he could, his fingers just reached the latch. But it was stuck, and he couldn't get enough leverage to open it. Looking around the clearing, he saw a big piece of wood he could use as a hammer. He whacked the chunk of wood against the window frame. When he reached inside again, the latch slid back easily, and the window opened. Uncertainly, he stuck in his head and looked around the shack. It was dark and musty inside. Carefully, he eased himself through the window. This had to be the hideout that the poacher had mentioned. If he had heard right, something special was hidden here. Tom scanned the inside of the shack. A hunting rifle stood in one corner, and some rabbit skins hung on the wall. On a platform along one wall lay some filthy bedclothes. A low stove stood on one end of the room, and on the wobbly table in the middle, someone had left the remainder of his breakfast. Everything was covered with dust and grime. Having studied the whole room, Tom turned his attention back to the bed. With his foot, he lifted off the covers and kicked the straw mattress. Nothing. He was about to look elsewhere when he remembered something the poacher had said. A straw mattress was a perfect hiding place. Dropping to his knees, Tom carefully probed the whole mattress. Still, he found nothing. Disappointed, he jerked it off the platform and examined the boards underneath. The room was quite dark, so it wasn't Tom's eyes but his fingers that put him in the right track. 2 of the boards felt loose. Prying at them with his fingernails, he finally managed to lift them, and he stared into a black space underneath. Tom's heart pounded wildly. He was sure this must be a secret hiding place. He groped into the blackness as far as he could reach, but his fingers only found more space. Should he lower himself into the hole? He stared into the darkness below. When his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw that the floor of the space was about 1.5 meters below the floor. He hesitated no longer. Carefully, he lowered himself into the opening. A moment later, he was standing slightly stooped in the dark hollow under the bed. It was chilly down here. He shivered. The musty smell was even stronger than upstairs. The place made his skin crawl. He wanted to get out of here as quickly as he could. He forced himself to be calm, however, and began a systematic search. The space was much larger than he had thought at first. It seemed to run under the floor of the entire hut. In the far corner, he saw something that looked like 2 crates, but he wasn't sure. When he stepped forward to investigate, he stubbed his toe against something hard. He bent down and saw a small suitcase lying on the floor. Picking it up, he carried it back to the opening to examine it. The suitcase was very old. The 2 latches that held it shut opened easily. When he lifted the lid, Tom's mouth dropped open in astonishment. The case was stuffed with wallets and watches, some of them gold, a few gold bracelets and other jewelry. Glued in the lid of the suitcase was a nameplate that had been partly ripped out. Although it had been damaged, it was still readable. A name and address were written on it in faded ink. In the dim light, it took Tom some time to decipher the name, but once he had, his suspicions were confirmed. The suitcase belonged to the farmer in whose house Jimmy had planted the snapshot of Tom and his friends. Tom realized that he had the proof he needed right in his hands. The gang had put most of their loot in the stolen suitcase and given it to the poacher, who apparently worked with them. What should he do now? He had to get out of there as quickly as possible before the poacher returned, and he would take the suitcase with him. If he could reach the police in time, he and his friends were cleared. He shuddered in the chilly hideout and hurriedly climbed back out. Upstairs in the shack, he noticed some clothing hanging on nails along the wall. He couldn't continue to wander about in the woods wearing nothing but swimming trunks. Who knows how far he had to go before he found the nearest town. It might not be a bad idea to borrow these clothes for the time being. He picked out a sturdy work shirt and a pair of corduroy trousers, complete with suspenders. A pair of heavy boots completed his outfit. He looked like a farm boy who had put on his father's clothes. The shirt and pants were much too wide for him. If Carl and Bert saw me like this, they'd sure laugh, thought Tom. But he didn't mind looking a little strange. It was better than getting scratched up. Tom was growing increasingly anxious. It was time for him to be leaving. When he looked out through the open window, he got a sudden fright. Scout was standing in the clearing with raised hackles. He must have smelled someone coming. Strangely enough, he wasn't looking at the hawthorn hedge, but at the shack, as if the danger came from inside. Tom didn't stop to think about it, however. He tossed the suitcase out of the window and climbed out after it. He pulled the window shut behind him, but didn't take time to fasten the latch. "Come on, Scout, let's go!" he cried, dashing toward the hole in the hedge with the suitcase in his hand. Scout beat him to the opening and swiftly wriggled through. Tom stopped a few seconds to listen for voices on the other side of the hedge. He heard nothing. Had he run scared for nothing? Somewhat reassured, he pushed the suitcase ahead of him through the opening and began to crawl after it. When he was halfway through, he definitely heard voices. Not in front of him, but from the shack. The sound paralyzed him for a few seconds. Then he frantically crawled on. In his panic, Tom's shirt snagged on a branch. Anxious to free himself, he ripped the shirt and got a bloody scratch on his shoulder. At the same time, the trousers snagged on a branch and held him fast. He tried to wrench himself loose, but both the branch and the trousers were too strong. Lying on his stomach, he fumbled behind his back with both hands to free himself. It only took a few seconds, but it seemed forever to Tom. Just as he loosened himself and began to crawl forward again, he heard someone pounding on the window behind him, and a furious voice, the voice of the poacher, shouted at him. Tom slithered forward, carefully but swiftly. He didn't want to get snagged again. As he emerged from the hole in the thorn hedge and scrambled to his feet, he heard the latch squeal and the door bang open. Footsteps sped toward the hole in the hedge.